Hi, I'm Drew Dudley. I'm the author of This is Day One, a practical guide to leadership that matters. And today on the show, we're going to talk about why most of the leadership on the planet comes from people who do not think that they're leaders. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series. I'm your host, Dov Baron, the founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything. Let me ask you, do you need to level up your leadership? Have you considered this? Are we measuring leadership by the right metrics? We often say things like, well, you can't argue with the leader's results, but maybe we need to. Want to know why? Check out this episode. Remember, you can chat about this episode or any past episodes on our Facebook page. Simply search out Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Podcast, and you'll find it there. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. As always, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcasts. We always need your help in staying relevant, so please get yourself over to iTunes, rate, review, and please subscribe to the show. When you do, let us know. We always appreciate that. You can also catch us on traditional terrestrial radio stations across the United States every Monday and Thursday. We're out there all the way from Wisconsin to Philadelphia, all the way down to Georgia. You can also find us on Roku TV, where there's over 100,000 subscribers. And if you're a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the top podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. With a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every show, we are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. By the way, you can also listen to us on Google Home and Alexa by simply saying, play Dov Baron's podcast. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, whether you're a CEO, someone in the C-suite, a sales leader, an entrepreneur, or a leader in any capacity, you know that even if you're okay with it now, there was likely a time when you were less than comfortable with the title leader. Have you ever thought about why we struggle with owning our leadership? Furthermore, as a progressive conscious leader, you likely understand that a good part of your job is to actually grow new leaders. But how do you do that when all too often the people who you want to step into that leadership role, they might be shying away from even the title, and the ones who want to jump into it might actually be very poorly suited? Well, stay tuned, because our guest on this episode is Drew Dudley. He is the founder and chief catalyst at Day One Leadership, Inc., which helps organizations around the world increase their leadership capacity. His clients have included some of the world's biggest dynamic companies and organizations, including McDonald's, Dreamworks Animation, JP Morgan, 75 colleges and universities. Prior to founding Day One, he spent 8 years as the director of one of Canada's largest leadership development programs at the University of Toronto, and served as national chair on one of Canada's largest youth charities, which mobilized 35,000 volunteers to raise $1 million annually to support the work of Cystic Fibrosis Canada. Drew has spoken to over 250,000 people in 5 continents. Time, Business Insider, Inc. magazine have all named his TED Talk as one of the 10 speeches that will make you a better leader. Please help me welcome the man whose TED Talk has been voted one of the top 15 most inspiring TED Talks of all time, author of the Wall Street Journal bestseller, This is Day One, the practical guide for leadership that matters. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Drew Dudley.
That's a nice way to start, my friend.
Just a little one.
I love it. I love it.
Good to have you, Drew. I'm glad you could join us. Thank you so much, mate.
Oh, Dov, it's great to be here. This is a big honor.
Thank you, sir. And it is for us too. Now, I was talking about it right in the intro there. Why do you think that we are less than comfortable with the title leader, particularly those people who actually are decent human beings and actually would make great leaders seem to be the ones who are most like, oh, I don't know.
I think one of the things, it surprised me that was the case. And when I had the chance to go out and speak all over the world, I started by that question, how many of you in the room are comfortable calling yourself leaders? And I guess I've asked it 1,000 times. And less than 1% of the time do I get half the people in any given room willing to raise their hands. And often those rooms are filled with C-suite executives,
Exactly.
CEOs, but we're also talking rooms full of teachers, of nurses, of people who are on the front lines of social change in this world, and they're still not raising their hands. And that shocked me because I knew when I worked with students that was the case. But as we came out of the education system, I figured as people got older, that was going to start to shift, particularly people who are running huge corporations and have thousands of people in some cases directly impacted by their work. And as I started to dive into why it was, I realized that I was part of the system that was creating the problem. And the education system, and I'll probably come back to this a lot as we talk, the education system, I want to be straight up, is one of the most important, empowering privileges that we get in our society. Not everyone on the planet gets it, but it can also be one of the most limiting and disempowering and dangerous. And that's where I think this seed of a block between our identities and leadership comes from, is how we get taught about leadership. Because when we want people to understand a new concept, particularly one they've never heard about before, and particularly young people, we always use examples. That's the best way to clarify for somebody an example. And I think what we have to remember is whatever example you're given to understand a concept first shapes your understanding of that concept for the rest of your life. But I think what we also have to realize is it also limits your understanding of that concept for the rest of your life. So
just let me see if I get this, because I want to make sure people are staying with us. So if I'm at school, let's not even go university, let's just say school, and my teacher, my history teacher, whatever it might be, says, if you want to look at what leadership is, then you need to examine Julius Caesar, or you need to examine Gandhi. I mean, I'm using two that are very different. And what you're saying is that for that kid moving forward into adult life, they'll always hold that framework of that's what real leaders are. So if I got Julius Caesar, I've got a very different model than if I've got Gandhi.
Without a doubt. And more importantly, I think what you'll embed is that to be a leader, you have to do things that people will teach you about 60 years or 2,000 years down the road, because it's very rare in the education system. And we're not talking university, we're talking 6, 7 years of age, that's the type of example we're using. Julius Caesar, Martin Luther King, presidents, scientific groundbreakers, people who conquer empires. Think back, everyone listening, and even yourself, like that was what we were given as examples. And often as we start to figure out what we want out of our lives, those are who we start to emulate or aspire to. Because think about it, kids today are still being given the same things. Like look at Warren Buffett invest, look at Steve Jobs innovate, look at Mark Zuckerberg create an empire. And there's nothing wrong with celebrating that, but it limits how people think of leadership, because they see themselves, if they aren't like that, even if they're good at their job, even if they take pride in their job, they see leadership as changing the world. They see leadership as getting into history textbooks. And for most people, they don't feel they can do that.
So the distinction where we get in our own way about embracing it is the grandiosity.
Yeah.
That if your leadership doesn't have grandiosity, then you're not really a leader. As opposed to, what one of the exercises I just gave this out last week in a training I did, and one of the exercises was share something as a leader that you're proud of, and people struggle. And I said, it might be where you saved you pulled somebody out from under the bus that another leader was looking to throw them under the bus, where you took an initiative to do something that everybody else was afraid to do. So you're talking about taking the grandiosity out of it. And the problem is the examples we're given give us grandiosity, so we think that that's what we've got to be a leader. Am I getting it?
Yeah, and I love the phrase grandiosity. I've never used that one before, but I think, for those who are listening who, are part of large organizations or are part of the culture creators, just realize that from a very young age, a lot of the people in your company, and by that I mean most of the introverts and anybody who didn't get straight A's, because not only do we teach grandiosity as kids get older, but we also teach the indications that you can achieve grandiosity, which means you either got to perform on the athletic field or you've got to perform in the classroom. But that means that everybody who might be a great teammate but isn't going to get drafted, or everybody who is a C student but wildly creative and maybe just doesn't write tests well, our companies and most of the people we love, it's just filled with individuals from a very young age said, well, that's not for me. And some are fine with that, but others always feel a little bit less as a result. And also, don't forget, the ones who did get great grades and the ones who did excel on the athletic field, and along with many other indicators, sometimes they all think one of two things. I am better than those people, or I don't deserve this. So it's one of those two things at all times. Or I better keep getting straight A's, or I better keep performing, or I better rise up very quickly to VP before the age of 30, or this will all go away. And I think that means our organizations are filled with people who've given up on the idea of leadership for them, or individuals who are desperately working 90 hours a week so that doesn't get taken away from them. And I think a lot of people listening, even if they're really, really successful, there's that little voice in your head that's going, I don't really belong here. Like at any moment, I'm going to screw this up, or I never got trained on this. How'd this happen?
Yeah, exactly. We've done lots of videos around imposter syndrome because more than 70% of people who are in leadership roles feel like imposters. And I think you're absolutely right. I think it's because they haven't got something grandiose to share with the world. So I'm not really a leader, because I didn't save the world and I didn't do something heroic. So doesn't really count. But that's absolute nonsense. You're right.
And I think we have to distinguish. I apologize, my friend, for the rest of this conversation. The difference between people in leadership roles and formal leadership positions and leaders, because I think formal leadership roles and leadership positions are a subsection of leadership. It's a real core part of everything that I talk about.
Yeah, and so just break them apart for a moment, and then we'll come back to them later on, because that's important. I want to plant that seed.
Yeah, my argument is that there's a gap for everyone between the person they want to be and how they're actually behaving. And often we do one of two things. We pretend the gap isn't there, but I think for more people, we rationalize the gap. So the gap is temporary, okay? Until I finish my degree, until I pay off my student loans, until I make vice president, until we get through this difficult time at work or our relationship. So we rationalize the gap as temporary, but as long as that gap exists, there's always something that we feel is a little bit wrong with us, or we've diminished ourselves a little, no matter how much external validation we get. So you could be named vice president at the age of 29, but as long as the gap between the person you want to be and how you're actually behaving exists, that will bother you. So my argument is leadership, and this is a form of leadership to which we all can and should aspire, is working and having a plan to close that gap on a daily basis. So leaders are defined by the behaviors in which they engage every day. Positional leadership is the formal expectations for what those behaviors have to be, right? So if you're vice president or you're CEO, the behaviors you have to engage in every day are a part of that role, right?
Sure.
And so there's certain things that you have to do to achieve things for the benefit of a larger group. But not everybody has that. Many people, all that we could evaluate their leadership on are their daily behaviors and how they impact others. And the problem, I think, that comes into a lot of positional leaders or formal leaders is that the responsibilities of that job so often are allowed to take up our whole life that we no longer pay attention to what our desired personal behaviors are, because we constantly sacrifice who we want to be for what we have to do. And I think a lot of people listening here may struggle with that. I know I did. That your to-do list, because of your formal leadership position, starts slamming your to-be list, which means you put it off and put it off. And all of a sudden, that bigger form of leadership, which is daily behaviors that impact other people in a positive way, keep making way for things that we have to do that build a company, but don't necessarily directly impact people on any given day.
See, I want to make that distinction here, and I think this is something I've been focused on as long as I can remember. I've never been very good with to-do lists. My wife has a fabulous to-do list. She does a list, she checks a list, and she goes, "Why isn't it?" I mean, I have priorities that are up on my wall, and and things that go in my calendar. But the to-do list, I don't do very well with. But I am very clear about having a not to-do list.
Oh.
Right? Things like that cannot get onto my list. Like that's because it's actually unhealthy for me. It's destructive for me. But also, the to-be list is at every beginning of every year for me. That's like when I set out and go, okay, who do I want to be? That's part of the, like, what is the growth? What is the development? And I think that leadership is about that commitment to who do I want to be? What is it that I'm going to evolve about myself? And what I love about what you're doing is this daily to-be list of, well, who am I going to evolve into? What is the next, and the analogy I've given a million times is leadership in many ways, outside of the grandiosity, leadership in many ways is, for most of us, fumbling in the dark with a flashlight. And you can see about 3 feet in front of you. And if you're not a leader, you sit down in the dark and go, I can't see. But if you're a leader, you go, I've got 3 feet of view and I'll step into the 3 feet. And if you're behind me or you're beside me and you want to come on that 3 feet, great. But we're only going 3 feet at a time because that's all I can see. And I'm willing to step into that. And I may have in my head that great leaders can see 300 feet. But that's the grandiosity again. The truth of the matter is that great leaders that I've met pretty much know the 3 feet in front of them. They have an expertise, obviously, and that they may have a 300-foot view. But in a daily basis, at a behavioral level, I love that you're doing this, to do, not just to do, but to be list. And I love that you make that distinction between we get caught in the to do and miss the to be. And that's awesome. I want to bring it back to you because I think this is important. I said in the intro that your TED Talk was named as one of the best, most inspiring TED Talks of all time, that you've got a Wall Street Journal best-selling book. This is day one. What don't we know about you that you wish we would?
Yeah, I think a big part of the whole day one concept is easier to understand if you realize that the day one concept is a mix between what I was teaching and sharing at the University of Toronto, which is that formal leadership theory. Now, theory is the word you add to interesting things to make them boring. And then it sort of started to meld with some personal experiences, is what has given sort of birth to this day one idea. And the day ones, there's a lot of day ones in my life. Day one of starting my own company. And I will openly admit, I spent almost 2 years too long in my old job because someone once told me the 3 most addictive things on the planet are crack, carbohydrates, and a salary. And, you get hooked on any of those 3 things, and it starts to impact the decisions that you make and the freedom that you have. Absolutely. And so, I had day one starting my own company, even though it was really hard to do that. Like, the university is the most secure job on the world. I had day one of 100-pound weight loss, which, the whole idea of losing 100 pounds is terrifying. So I had to start saying, okay, this is the first day of that. I had day one of being a mental advocate or a big advocate for mental health awareness, which means every time I speak, to answer your question, is I want to let every audience to whom I speak know that I'm bipolar, because we still live in a world that equates mental illness with mental weakness. And my whole career is based on whether or not you think my ideas are credible. And so I want people listening to know, especially those who are also battling with mental illness and they're doing it quietly, Like, I want them all to know that I don't have a good life and a good business for someone who's mentally ill. Like, I just have a good life. And, a big part of growing up was, if you want to impress people, you got to make them say, oh, wow, I didn't know that. But what I really found is that if you want to impress people, or not even impress them, but to make them feel as if you've made them better, the best thing that you can do is to make them say, oh my God, I thought I was the only one. Like, I
Yes.
thought I was the only one who was afraid of that, who was hurt by that, who was hiding that. And I had day one, and this is probably the one that shaped the most. I had day one of a life without alcohol. And I'm powerless over alcohol, step one. And
Hmm.
one of the things that I learned in recovery is, if you don't want to have a drink for the rest of your life, you have to you have to choose not to have a drink today.
Today.
Because anything to which you commit for the rest of your life is too scary. Like, if I said to you, like, you have to do one thing every day for the rest of your life, you would talk yourself out of making that commitment. But if I said, okay, today you have to commit to these things, they're
Right.
non-negotiable, that's more workable. And I started to realize that all of those things that I just listed sort of fell into that concept. Don't worry about the scale when you're losing weight. Simply ask, did I do those non-negotiable behaviors? Did I eat right? And did I exercise today? Not going to do it for the rest of your life. Did you do it today? Did you commit today to being open about your mental illness so that somebody else can feel more free to do that? And the idea of non-negotiable means, my primary focus between the beginning of the day and the end of the day is not to have a drink.
Hmm.
And that goes ahead of everything else. And I started to realize, if I can make that kind of prioritization for that behavior, I can do it for other behaviors, the healthy behaviors and the leadership behaviors. Because the same way I evaluate whether or not I was successful in my recovery today is the same way I evaluate whether or not I'm successful in my leadership. Because my leadership and my behaviors over the past 20 years have brought me to where I am. Everybody who's listening, your behaviors and your leadership have taken to where you are over the last 20 years. But my argument with day one leadership is the same way with my drinking. It does not matter what you did every day before this. If I want to stay what I am, a leader, sober, if I want to stay someone healthy, all I can evaluate is today. And it
Hmm.
reframes this idea that, and it drives me that everybody listening here, you, me, Zuckerberg, we all got up this morning having accomplished the exact same number of leadership behaviors. 0. And so you can't rely on what took you to CEO or what took you to founder. All you can rely on is today. And those to-do lists that come from having achieved that will often start to shove the personal behaviors off the table. And my argument is that you can prioritize personal behaviors at the same level, as your to-do list
Hmm.
because I have to do that. And I know that we can do that as a result. And so that's really what you need to understand about where the day one concept came from. It really
Yeah.
came from the fact that I have to recommit every day to certain behaviors, or I will be 320 pounds again, or I will be drinking again. And so I've lived a life where you have to prioritize to be over to do, or everything I want to be falls apart.
So, thank you for sharing that. It was really, I sincerely appreciate your openness with that. The if I may, I'm going to go into that just a little bit here, which is um, bipolar. I'm assuming that you're medicated and you take your meds and all the rest of it. Um, but when was that diagnosed, and when did you step into it? You know what I mean? So, because it's one thing to go, I'm fucking crazy, because I'm feeling like I'm on top of the world and I'm feeling like I'm in the toilet, and it's crazy. And I think that there are a lot of people watching, listening, who feel like that. And it's a mood swing. We all have them, right? But it's a different thing to have a bipolar. And it's a different thing again to go, maybe this isn't a mood swing, and to step out, because as you just so well stated, the world wants to slap a label on you and go, "Oh, you're bipolar. You're a nutter. Like, let's not have you in the job, because you get wacky on us. You forget your meds, and you're going to go. We have to deal with you, and so we're not going to employ you." Or as I always say to people, I we taught many programs for many years, and one of them was around health. And what I said is, when you've got to the weight you want to get to, which is a healthy weight range, it's not a number. It should not be a number. It should be a healthy weight range, because everybody fluctuates. You have a food you didn't agree with you're suddenly going to hold water and you're going to get heavier, right? Because of inflammation. But what I said is, please don't tell people, unless it's part of your job, unless part of your career, don't tell people I used to be 100 pounds lighter. Because if you're standing there in a gorgeous red dress and you're looking spectacular, and I know you would look spectacular in a red dress, Drew, it's just the way it goes, that beard and the dress. I mean, but if you're standing there in your red dress and you're by the buffet and somebody comes up to you and goes, wow, you look fantastic. And you go, well, I used to be 100 pounds heavier. They're no longer seeing you in the context of who you are. They're seeing you in the context of who you were. And unless you are an advocate for weight loss and helping people to be healthy, you have to remember that people are always holding the framework. And it's like the one you talked about, the grandiosity at the beginning about, whether it's Martin Luther King or Julius Caesar or Gandhi or whoever it is, people are always going to use a framework you gave them. So if it's not your world, don't pre-frame people with a world that's not who you are anymore. And I love that you're asking people to step into who do you want to be and what are you going to do today to be that. So when you got to that place, how did you deal with the judgment of, you're a heavy guy, like you said, what was it?
320, I think. Eventually, you stop stepping on the scale at that point.
Right, 320. So 320 and bipolar. How did you get to the realization, I've got to do something about this? Because it's so easy to feel like, not for you, but for any of us, to feel like the victim of.
Yeah, I think those are two different ways I had to deal with those two things. One came before the other, and they're all tied together. Like there's no reason for anything. There are reasons for everything. The bipolar, it's interesting because it's not, the difference between a mood swing and a state swing. And I think that's it. People experience mood swings. I still experience mood swings.
Of course.
But bipolar is a complete mental state swing from that.
Absolutely.
I'm on top of the world. I can do anything, and I'm missing social cues. And depression, which is, it's like the best way I've ever found to describe depression is, when you walk through a spider web and it just sort of like wraps around you and it's not part of you, but it feels like it actually melted into your skin.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine that was despair. That's what depression is. And what made me realize that I had to get out of that was I made plans to take my life. And that's when you realize that you're about to pass a threshold that will take away everything. And I thought I tried everything. I've tried everything. There's a hopelessness that comes. And then I realized I had tried everything except asking for help. And so in terms of the challenges, when you're hypomanic, that top of the world state, you are in some ways more capable of things than other people. And so that played a big role when I was younger, I think, in helping me move forward. I mean, it's interesting in bipolar, like you can fight addiction, but in that way, you kind of get addicted to the disease itself because of where it takes you. Later on in life, that's when the other side of the swing tends to come in. The hypomania tends to start earlier than the depression. And in my 20s, when I built this incredible career, when you're hypomanic, you can build it and you can hold it up and it becomes part of who you are. Mm-hmm. And then as you swing into depression, this thing that you used to hold up to define you, all of these achievements, all of a sudden it's a giant sword above your head. And that drove me to a dark, dark place that I couldn't live up. My students used to call me Superman. And like when all of a sudden Superman doesn't feel strong, Superman feels weak, you feel that's why everyone cares about you, because of what you can accomplish, not because of who you are. And what happened was in 2007, when I realized that I was in a really bad place, that's when I asked for help. It was the last thing I was going to try. And in many ways, I was like, at least I can check this off so that when I'm gone, my friends can think, well, he tried everything. Because I knew they'd be pissed at me if I hadn't tried. And that's when it got a name. And when something's given a name, it's a little less scary. And that's how that started. But also what happens is, in terms of the weight loss, it's a cycle, right? Like you're heavy, so you feel terrible about yourself. So I drank. When I drank, I ate a ton. And then the cycle begins. Sure. And it's interesting, what really triggered me on the weight side of it, because once I got healthy and I could start to think a little clearer, ultimately, I was eventually refused the opportunity after 2.5 hours in line to ride the roller coaster, the Harry Potter roller coaster at Universal Studios, because this poor 18-year-old had to look at me and say, I'm sorry, sir, but this ride will not safely accommodate your dimensions. And a big part of my work is saying these have got to be your daily goals. Start day one. And what's interesting is that I hear what you're saying about the framework that people understand, but I also look at it this way. When I say to people, I used to be 320 pounds, I'm not sure if they focus on the frame I just gave of what I used to be, or they recognize the voyage that has come from there to here. I don't hide where I used to be, because I think it speaks less to how you should understand me and more to how you should understand the voyage that's come in between, which is why I'm so open about those things. But
I think it's a part of your message, and that's what I was saying.
Yeah.
If it's part of your message, then it's important because we are in the public eye, you and I, and people are seeing. I mean, if you put on 100 pounds, people will notice.
And you know what? 35 have come back on in the last 6 weeks, right? Or 6 months, right? And it's hard because this is part of what I have to challenge, is that I know that's a problem, not just because I'm unhealthy, but part of the reason I lost all that weight is I'm laying out a process for daily discipline behaviors, and I clearly wasn't taking care of myself. Now, not everyone who's overweight is overweight because of their behavior. There's a million reasons. But I think we have to acknowledge that, at least in my case, and I'm not alone out there, many of us who are overweight because we make bad daily decisions. And at 320 pounds, I can't talk about daily discipline decisions if I'm not making them in terms of my own health. So that's why all that's a big part of it, is that so much of my life has had to be, in order to be successful, a recommitment daily, first to deal with the things that hold me back before I can start focusing on the things that drive me forward. And hopefully in the process, other people as well.
But that's what I like about your book is it's about understanding that it's a daily process. And I think that, in answer to the question we talked about right at the top of the game, which was, why do good people shy away from leadership, is because those of us who really understand what leadership is understand it's not a title, and it is a daily discipline. And it's like, shit, now I'm going to be really held accountable to that, right? I can sort of pontificate on the side, but if I step into the light, now I'm going to okay, well, this is what we have to do. Well, did you do it? Not so much. Okay.
Say when we pose questions as part of our workshop, right? And then somebody says, well, how about you? And you're just, oh, shit. Right?
Exactly, yeah.
Hey, shut up. I think
excuse me, I'm asking the questions.
Well, it's interesting. I talk about that in the book, is that this is one of the best ways to help other people learn is through questions, right? Like it's the type of questions where the person being asked learns more than the person doing the asking. And I think that we don't work enough on that as leaders to figure out you run a podcast, so you know the power of that, but we're not great at it. And I always joke that the best way to learn is to spend time with 5-year-olds, because 5-year-olds are relentless in their questioning. And I have never been schooled more in terms of the shit that I don't know than it is from young people, because they don't realize that in asking the question, they're not worried about looking stupid anymore. I mean, I once had a 5-year-old ask me if I was the Pope, because they were talking about the Pope in his class. And when you're 5 and you're talking about a stranger and one walks in, you're like, oh, it's the dude.
Must be the Pope.
And he said, are you the Pope? And I didn't know what to say. So I gave him the truth. I said, no, I'm here to give a speech for your teachers. And this young man looks at me and says, oh, what's a speech? And I mean,
wow.
Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah, and Marshall McLuhan said, we don't know who first discovered water, but we're pretty sure it wasn't a fish. Like, we are least aware of the environments with which we're most familiar. And 1,000 speeches, I had never, ever asked myself, what is a speech? And I looked down at this kid, and every now and then your brain serves you up an answer that surprises you that it's so good. And
that was good.
I looked down at him and said,
why aren't I recording this?
And I said, well, a speech is an opportunity to change minds. And I was so pleased with myself.
Oh
I thought
yeah.
that was so, and he looked back at me and he said, "Oh, how do you know that you should?"
Oh,
And I was like,
not even how do you know if you did, but
"How do you know if
good.
you should?" And I just shut up. And see, we need to get that kid out of school before we wreck him, because we lose that type of behavior. So that ability to as a leader start to think about the most powerful questions that you can ask other people, not to hear their answer, although you want to listen to it, is to help them understand that they don't know the answer. And the urge as a leader to tell the answer or to demonstrate that you know the answer is really overwhelming, as opposed to helping people discover it. And I think that's really important.
Well, one of the things you talk about in the book is these 6 daily questions. We're
Yeah.
talking about questions here. So let's go into a little bit of that, because I want people to have something they can go away with and go, oh, okay, let's put this into practicality for me. What would that mean?
Well, this is something we adopted through a social experiment at the university. And I'll jump to the end, to be honest. What happened is this particular social experiment, which started when a student said, "It's a lot easier to stand up for an ideal than it is to live up to one," which I thought was genius. And then I
Mm,
discovered he stole it. But he pointed out to me, I used to always say to my students that in leadership, you never steal an idea, you benchmark a best practice. And I
mm,
thought, I like that. I'm going to benchmark that. But what happened is we basically at the end developed a mindset. And the mindset was, imagine if every single night before you went to bed, you had to prove that you deserve another day on this planet. Like, that would change everything. Not at the end of your year, not at the end of your life does it get judged. At the end of every day, you have
mm.
to prove you deserve another day on the planet. Now, to do that, you have to pass a test. The thing is, you are given the questions to the test in the morning. And if that was the case, the same way not having a drink is a priority for me, because if I don't, my life will probably end. Imagine we thought about that in terms of,
Mhm.
you got 6 questions, you got to get 3 every day, or you don't get another day on the planet. And you get the questions in the morning, and those questions are tied to the core values you care about. And my work is helping people identify their core values and then create their own versions of this test. But we call this the leadership test. 6 key questions tied to our key values. So we said, okay, we want to stand for impact, courage, growth, empowerment, class, and self respect. And we defined what each of those meant, because most of us haven't. Like, if I walked up to you and said, finish this sentence, integrity is a commitment to what? Most
Mhm.
people can't. So we picked those 6 values. We picked those 6 definitions using the phrase "a commitment to," because that's always followed by behaviors.
All
And
right. So if somebody's saying, a value for them, I'm just making one up, but if somebody says a value for them is family,
mhm.
what would be the question?
Well, it depends on. First, you'd have to come up with the definition, because you can't. The
Yep.
questions, and I'll talk about this in a second. The questions are based on some psychological research that says unanswered questions powerfully drive human behavior, because the human brain
Yep.
hates unanswered questions. Now,
Right.
family, it's important you define it yourself. But let's say family is a commitment to prioritizing the individuals with whom you interact most, or who are closest to your heart, right? A commitment to prioritizing the needs of people closest to your heart. Now, you can define what closest to your heart means. And
Right.
so, a question: what question could you craft so that if you answered it every day, it's impossible to answer the question without living up to that value? And so, for instance, let me try on the fly for family. How about
Sure.
this? How did I show I love you today without saying the words? And that question's based on a beautiful blog post that a friend of mine wrote, when after about a year, I think the first Valentine's Day after his girlfriend had been murdered, he
Oof.
told this wonderful story about how he realized the phrase "I love you" is bullshit.
Mhm.
And he said the problem is we use the phrase as a substitute for showing it. Like, we say "I love you" is a way of showing I love you. And he committed for, I think it was a month, never using the word with this woman he loved more than anything in the world. all he was allowed to do was show her through behaviors. And so I challenge everyone to do this. Sit back and think about the people you love the most, and then think about what they need to feel loved. Is it showing up at their soccer game instead of working late? Is it, in his case, they did something together that she was more advanced than him, and so she always kind of had to wait for him. They were ice climbing or rock climbing, sorry. And ultimately, he started studying on the side so that one day he could surprise her by being able to do it, and she didn't have to wait for him anymore. And he said, that's my way of showing. So you can see, pick the value, define it using a commitment to, and then create a question that if you answer it, what did I do today to show I love you without saying the words? If you answer that question, and notice it's not a yes, no question.
No, of course.
Because you can lie. It demands specificity. If you answer that question, you've lived that value, and you live it every single day. And so the process of creating the questions has a step-by-step process, but basically ask, if I answer this question, will I live this value? And that's what the process became. And the answering of the questions wasn't something we did if we had time. Like, you needed 3. So we had those 6 to go back quickly. Impact was, what have I done today to recognize someone else's leadership? Because leadership recognized is leadership created. Right. Growth was, what have I done today to make it more likely someone would learn something? So there's the asking the questions. Courage was, what have I done today that might not work, but tried anyway? Because we get educated out of courage through school, and because we don't want to make mistakes. And that question's a game changer. I met the love of my life because of that question. What have I done today that might not work, but tried anyway? Empowerment was, what have I done today to move someone else closer to a goal, which is hard in a world that teaches its competition.
Sure.
Class was a commitment to treating people in situations better than they deserve to be treated. And that question was, when have I elevated instead of escalated today? Like, those 3 words will save relationships and careers. Elevate, don't escalate. Elevate, don't escalate. Because leaders elevate instead of escalating. Elevating means trying to succeed. Escalating means trying to win. And the last one, and this is the foundation of all of them, self-respect. A commitment to recognizing you cannot add value to other people's lives until you've added enough value to your own. So what have I done today to be good to myself? And just like looking at your audience and hearing your podcast, I think this is one that high achievers have to listen to, because I think along the way we've equated leadership with martyrdom. And, how late you work and how often you stay, how often you skip something, or what you sacrifice of yourself and your well-being so you can build this company or make sure other people are taken care of. You cannot take care of other people when you are empty. When you are empty, you have nothing to give. And so not only is that an important question to ask for, to look for self-respect or to live it, it's also really important during hiring, is to hire and fill your organization with people who have self-respect, who aren't in that interview talking just about what they'll do for you. But honestly, I try to frame questions where I try to establish where and how this person sets boundaries. Because if you hire people who basically are saying, I will rip down my boundaries for you and I will lay my life on the line for this company, that seems nice, but they're probably going to burn out before they actually, or at some point, and they're not going to add value anymore. So those 6 values became the 6 questions, and our lives became about answering 3 of them every day. And it embraced the idea that, especially for young people, and this is for everybody, we are not always in charge of what we have to do every day. Even if you're the boss, actually, when you're the boss, you're less in charge of what you have to do every day, but you're always in charge of who you are. And the higher our achievement goes and the higher we rise, the less time we often have to pay to who we are. And so those 6 questions allowed us that even on the days where everything in our life blew the hell up in our face, we could still go home and say, yeah, but I passed the test today. So today was a loss, but it wasn't a waste. And there's a difference in framing your days as a loss rather than a waste. I think too often when we don't get the account, or we're after a goal and we fail at it, we're like, that was a waste. No, it was a loss. It wasn't a waste. You string enough waste together, it changes how you feel about yourself and how you treat other people. So that's the whole idea of the leadership test.
Great.
And it's all about your own questions.
That's profound. And I want to say to you as you listen to this that what Drew just outlined there, you're going to have to go back. You're going to have to listen to that probably 2-3 times and take some notes, because it might even sound simple, but it's not easy, because it will require you going underneath the surface. You'll actually have to dig a bit. You'll actually have to really look, rather than coming up with some bullshit that you think is the right answer. This is not about right. This is about true. So what's true for you, not what's right, not what should be on the list, but what's actually on the list for you. When I did my own work around my values and my non-negotiables, that was something I worked on for 2 full years. And by the way, you should know, because I'm a smarty pants, I had it down in 10 days. And then it took me 2 years to realize I was full of shit in the first 10 days. Right? Because then I had to go do exactly what Drew's talking about here, is I had to walk it out. I had to walk it and go, wow, that is a value I really want to have, but it actually doesn't matter to me. It's one that everybody thinks should matter to me, but it doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't. I don't care. What I really care about is this. That there's nothing wrong with that for somebody else, but it doesn't matter to me at that high level. So I really encourage you to listen back to this part again and again and again. Take the notes. Like I said, it's simple, but it's not necessarily easy, as Ernest Holmes said. Simple and easy are vastly different things.
Yeah, simple doesn't mean little. I think that's important. I just wanted to say, I love what you just said there, because I think leadership often begins when you realize you're full of shit.
Oh, yeah.
And a big part that drove me, and I tell the story in the book about a 7-year-old who made me realize it, is that the phrase, I'm the type of person who, is almost always followed by a lie. Like every time someone says, I'm the type of person who, a red flag goes off going, yeah, that's a lie, because truths are very rarely announced as truths. They just are demonstrated. So I really like that you said, 2 years, but then you have to tear it apart. It's a big part of my work is that you don't ask people their values. You give them exercises to surface those values.
So again, profound, right? Because oftentimes I'll say to somebody, what's your values? And I can, you and I are paying attention. So they give me this list of stuff and I'm like, yeah, that's not your values. When I work privately with a client, I say, okay, let's start with doing some of your values work. And they go, okay. I said, have you done values work? And most of them, they're high level individuals I'm working with. They go, yeah, hell yeah, great. Tell me your top 5 values. And they lay them out and I go, great, fantastic. And then I'll ask them some questions and they go, you do know it's not your value, right?
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is that for something to be a value, and I struggle with this a lot, right? Because someone in one of the workshops put up his hand because I'm asking questions about values. He's like, how do you define a value? And I was like, shit, I probably should be able to do that. But I believe that a value is criteria for decision making. Like it's only a value if every time you make a personal or corporate organizational decision, the values are referenced and they're the way that you make the decision. Otherwise, they're just pretty on a website. But if when you're in a board meeting or you're in a meeting with your team and it's time to make a tough decision and the values don't come up, they're not directly referenced, they are not values, because values are criteria for decision making. And having criteria for decision making, you just said that difference between it's like simple and easy. Once you have your criteria or your values and then you define them, what you have is criteria for decision making. But now decision making process is simple but not easy.
Exactly.
Everyone out there, if you haven't defined the things you want to define your values, and here's what they mean. You don't have consistent decision making, because value-based leadership decision making is you take a look at the options available to you. You hold them up next to your list of values, so you better damn well know what they are. And then you ask which one of these options is most consistent with this list of values. Now, the challenge with this decision making, and this is, and Dov, this is the problem all across the board, and we're all guilty of this, is that often the decision that's most consistent with your values sucks. Like it sucks. It doesn't let you look good. It doesn't allow you to avoid consequences. It doesn't allow you to stay in the job, take the money, or remain in the relationship. But it's always the decision you're happiest you made 5 years from now. Like you face a tough decision, personally, professionally, look at the options and think about this. In 5 years, if I'm standing in front of a room full of people I respect, if my kids are there and old enough to understand the decision I made, what story do I want to tell about how I made this decision? And if you make every decision personally and professionally in the way that you hope you can describe it 5 years from now, as opposed to what you're actually facing, a lot of the noise surrounding our decision making falls away. And good leaders do this because it allows them to live their values every time the opportunity presents itself. My argument is that great leaders separate from good leaders because good leaders live their values whenever they get the chance. And great leaders create opportunities to live their values. That's the whole idea of the day one process, is that if these are your values, create a plan to actually live them every day. But they're values if you think about them when you make decisions. Not just, oh yeah, I embodied it with my decision. All right, but when did you think about family when you made that decision? And if it's not, how does this affect, how does this live up to my value of family? Then it's not actually a value. It's just something that you use to sound good.
Yeah.
Sorry, a little rant
Nice.
there.
No, it was great. That was fantastic. So we got to move on to a bit of a lightning round. Are you good with this?
Oh yeah.
Okay. What makes you cry?
Friday Night Lights.
What is
Friday
that?
Night
Is that
Lights.
it?
Friday
Oh,
Night
the
Lights.
movie.
Yeah, Friday Night Lights. No, the TV show, and
Oh,
every
TV show.
every Christmas episode of The West Wing somehow managed to tear me up. And memories of Costa Rica with my girlfriend.
Fabulous.
Oh, the second act of Hamilton. There we go. That's probably the big one now.
That's the big one now. What makes you cry laughing?
Oh wow, what a great question. What makes me cry laughing? I actually was reminded of this a couple of days ago. There is an episode of The Office, and I know like this is sort of an inside thing, but we had a really weird experience with a raccoon once on a road trip, and then we got back and we were exhausted. We hadn't slept in a day, and there's an episode of The Office that all of a sudden a raccoon shows up, and we fell on the ground laughing so hard you couldn't breathe. And now every time that episode I see it in rerun, I am taken back to a moment of pure joy, and it always makes me laugh, tear up. So really, it's memories with friends. I think laughing with friends and the memory of that still makes me laugh.
I don't know too many people who can tell me that crying laughing is something they did on their own, unless they were high on acid or something. But on mushrooms,
that's a valid point.
Possible. Yeah. But generally speaking, it involves other people. Who is someone that we likely don't know who has been a major influence on your life? We being the general public.
Yeah, I think every leadership hero you have should be someone that you know personally. Or your biggest leadership heroes should be someone you know personally, because you don't just see the outcome of their decisions, you see how they make decisions. And so anytime you're talking about leadership heroes, it should be people you know. And so one is named Shane Feldman. He's the CEO of an organization called Count Me In, and he's all of 23 years old. But his whole life, he runs a leadership conference where you can apply unless you could not afford to go to a leadership conference. And he'll scour the internet and watch the news to identify young people who are courageous or who fought through something. And he reaches out, or his organization reaches out and invites them, even though they've never heard of them. So there was a young woman in Newfoundland, I believe, who was on a list of like ugliest girls in class. And when she found out, she used that for other women, other young girls who were facing the same thing as an empowerment. And so Shane reaches out and brings her in. There's a guy named Blake Fleischacker who is all about gratitude and taught me the power of writing handwritten thank you cards. And he also taught me to get some of your own made, carry them with you. And when you see extraordinary, whether it's customer service or just treating another human being, write out a card. For everybody who's listening who travels a ton, this is something to do. Get your own customized thank you cards. And when you see someone at the front desk, a flight attendant, someone at the ticket counter, someone who's got that long lineup at Starbucks, because human beings are at their worst in airports, it seems. So write those cards. So those two men and a young woman named Sarah Stockdale, who runs a newsletter I highly recommend called We Need to Talk About, has taught me more about some of the things I do as a privileged straight white man that cause harm, that cause discomfort, and they're not done out of any kind of malice. They're just what my privilege has blinded me to. So those three, Shane Feldman and Count Me In, Blake Fleischacker and a young woman named Sarah Stockdale are my leadership heroes.
Wow, those are pretty cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
What is something that that you did for a long time outside of overeating? What is something you did for a long time that actually blocked you from your success, do you think?
Yeah, that would be the alcohol and the food. But
Right.
I think going back, and this is what I share with, and if you've got kids, particularly in high school, I think this is important. I lived my life for people I had not met yet.
Yeah.
And that caused me to devalue the people that were surrounding me every day. So in high school, I lived my life for university admissions counselors. Everything I did was about them. I hadn't met a single one of them. In university, it was all about grad school admissions counselors. Never met a single one of them at that point. But my whole life was about them. When I started my job, it was all about that interviewer for the next bigger job. So I encourage everybody who's listening, particularly if you're young or particularly if you raise a young person, be very careful about making your life all about people you haven't met yet. Because what it does is it blinds you to your ability to impact others today and how important they are. Because if your life is about people you haven't met yet, you are devaluing the importance of the people who surround you now. And I think that held me back for a long time.
That's powerful. Thank you. What
Thank
is you and I already touched on this, but I think it's important to come back here. I believe that real leadership requires courage. You talked about living your values, and values suck. So what is the most difficult leadership decision that you've ever had to make?
Wow. That's such a great question. On a personal level, it was stopping drinking. I
Mm-hmm.
think because you can't lead others until you can till you can lead yourself. Um, and then not to get dark, but I think a big decision I had to make was both to forgive myself, mostly to forgive myself for the death by suicide of my girlfriend. That that was that was on a personal leadership level one of the hardest things I had to do, because suicide is tied up with so many emotions, grief obviously, but also anger and guilt, and that was a really difficult decision for me. And I think on a more professional level, it was realizing that that you could have more than one toxic environment in your life, and that no amount of money is worth a toxic environment. And letting go of that without knowing what comes next was really difficult. So on a personal level, it was those two. And on a professional level, it was that third, to leave the university, not knowing what was next.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. In a world where where everybody's offended by everything, and you come from the university world, which I'm old enough to remember was the radical thinking world and has become the now most easily offended world. In a world where people are terrified to offend, let me ask you, what is your bravest opinion?
My bravest opinion.
Yeah, because it's like I said, there's opinions that we all hold, and that you and I, we talked about it before we even came on air. That there's certain things you're like, I don't know if I can say this here.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't say I hate Donald Trump in certain parts of the United States because you might not live with your own head on. You can't say I hate Obama in certain states because you would not live with your head on. So there's brave opinions that I think that the world needs changing by brave opinions, not by us all trying to be freaking politically correct.
I think it's contextual. I think that you just hit it, that it's contextual. So let me think of a brave opinion for your audience. How about this one? If I work more than 40 hours a week, I have failed myself. And that, especially in hustle culture, and when I go on panels at entrepreneurial events, and I say that, if I've worked more than 40 hours a week, I have failed myself. It means I've taken on too much. I haven't delegated effectively. I'm taking joy and a rush from my work as much as my leisure. Now, I don't believe in work-life balance. I believe in energy gain versus energy loss balance, because sometimes your life takes energy from you and your work gives it. But I think one of the things is my whole goal, after I buried the woman I loved, I said, work, as much as I love it, will not take more than 40 hours a week of my life, because my work is supposed to serve my life, not the other way around. And so that may not be a popular announcement, but I think if I work more than 40 hours a week, I'm failing myself.
I think that's a very brave opinion in today's culture. As we record this, last week I released a video, and in the video I talked about how you can't hustle your way to enlightenment. Right? Because everybody's like, yeah, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a hustler, and I work 90 hours a week, and I don't care. And and I talked about how your relationships are going down the toilet, and you're wondering why you're not as enlightened or as conscious as you'd like to be. Well, because you're fried. There's your clue. You're fried.
I love my job, and I find that if I only give myself 40 hours a week of it, I make the most out of that. But I mean, if the amount of time you could spend at your job is unlimited, then I don't know if you appreciate it as much. Now, if you work that hard because you have to and you're terrified, you probably shouldn't be in that job anyway. But if I used to be, you work 90 hours a week because you freaking love work, what I started to realize is that, man, I'm not making it a treat. So, and you mean Anastasia's death played a big role in that, when I realized I missed every hour that I didn't have with her. And I don't regret my job. I love the 40 hours I spend, but that's it, is that I want it to be a joy and a treat. And if you ate pizza every day for the rest of your life, eventually it wouldn't be as awesome. Don't get me wrong. It would still be awesome. One of my favorite pieces of advice that I ever heard someone give as part of one of my activities was, I asked people to give life advice, and she simply said, "You can't please everybody. You're not pizza." And I loved it. I absolutely. So, yeah, that's my way of looking at it, is that 40 hours a week makes it a joy. And more than that, you're probably gorging yourself.
What's a guilty pleasure for you?
Watching The West Wing over and over and over.
Especially the Christmas editions.
Yeah, I'll have it on in the background. I once plugged my computer into the radio of my car on a long trip and listened to the DVDs. I don't know why it is. It's like symphony, like white noise in the background for me. But yeah, I watch that show on repeat. It's ridiculous.
That's fabulous. Thank you. So we are coming towards the very end of the show. It's been awesome having you, but I want to ask you, I mean, you've actually done it, but I want to see if you've got anything else that you particularly want to share here, which is, what would be one piece of practical advice that you would want to leave our listeners with, that they would go away and do, preferably within the next 24 hours?
Take out a little sheet of paper and start listening for one particular word. Excuse me, the word just. We use the word just, and when I apologize, everyone got the hiccups all of a sudden. I wanted to keep track on this podcast of how many times you use the word, and I just got so into the conversation. Just is one of the most diminishing words in the English language. It's almost always used as a diminisher, and we use it for what we're doing, because we want in our own mind subconsciously to shrink the amount of time we think we're going to spend on it. So I just have to pick up the kids. I just have to get to this meeting. I just have to answer my emails. I just have to finish this project, because what we're doing is trying to trick our mind into thinking this won't take up so much time. But what you're doing is, those things take up most of your life. And so think about what you're doing to yourself when you diminish the importance of them. You're basically diminishing the importance of what you spend most of your time doing. And so then it spills over into how we talk about ourselves and what we do. And a lot of people in your organizations, for those of you who run organizations, they're doing this. I'm just a receptionist. I'm just middle management. I'm just an intern. Every time you use the word just to describe who you are or what you do, you're giving people permission to expect less from you. And you're teaching your kids and your employees to do the same thing. Because if you do it, everybody gets to do it. And I had somebody check on me once, and I used it 14 times in that 24-hour period. Every time you hear the word just out of your mouth or somebody else's, ask yourself, was that just used as a diminisher? And if it was, call them on it. Because tell people that they're never just anything. Leaders never allow people who they know are people of worth to diminish themselves in front of you. And so when you see it, catch it. And it's hard to sometimes do it. So just train yourself to the word just. And every time it's there, and if you can make this a rule at meetings, with your team, whatever, just whenever you hear it, oh, I just did it. I think I used it properly there. But stop for a moment and say, hey, that's not just anything, that's important. And it starts to train people to look for it themselves. So one thing you could go away and do, start looking for that word right now.
That's powerful. I actually do that with the teams I work with and with the clients that I work with. And at the same time, I have a bride who calls me out on it all the time. She'll say, oh, is it just, and I'll say, think like a double minimizer. It's just a little exercise.
Yeah.
And she's like,
the words we use.
And she's like, is it just a little exercise or is it a powerful insight? And I'm like, yeah, it's powerful insight. She says, please stop playing small. You are my business partner. And when you play small, that's not good for our business. Thank you.
No, and it's like...
it's a great exercise. It's powerful.
If you give an assignment to somebody who's more junior and you're like, hey, can you just take care of this? You're basically saying to them, this is an unimportant task, but I'm giving it to you because you're unimportant. And so I think that's the key, to pay attention to it. It's so subconscious. We have to focus, but language
absolutely
is important.
Fabulous. Drew, this has been a pleasure and honor, my friend. I really have enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Please tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find out more about you and all your fabulous resources, about your speaking, your book, etc.
Yeah, the best bet, I think, is at drewdudley.com, DREWDUDLEY.com. And that's got all my old videos. It's got how you can have me come and share this with people. It's got actually an online program that can walk you through how to surface your own values and how to create and turn them into questions. So that actually is an opportunity there as well. And yeah, I'll you know what? I'll figure out a way to make it more, like, I'll make it more affordable for all the people who are listening to this podcast. You and I can talk about that afterwards. But that's where to find me, drewdudley.com.
Fantastic. Well, Drew, as I said, it's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you for being with us. Hope you'll stay with us to the end. And remember, dear listener, that you can hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about the episode you've just been listening to or any past episodes on our Facebook page. Go and find the Dov Baron Leadership and Loyalty podcast to find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or strategist for your organization. Simply go to fullmontyleadership.com/consulting or fullmontyleadership.com/speaking. Now, be aware that the research consistently shows that even the fastest growing companies often face the challenge of spending money, spending energy and time, attracting, training, and developing top talent, but they also have to deal with an alarming employee turnover. If you're frustrated with investing in training and developing the talent and only have them leave before you get your ROI, then come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, because you can't outsource authenticity. Also, remember to stop by the Matrix like the movie, matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. You don't need a triple W. matrix.fullmontyleadership.com, and get your authentic leadership Matrix self-assessment tool. It's valued at $197, and it helps you to assess the real strengths and power of your leadership in 5 separate areas. So I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. And until next time, I want you to stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about whether you're fully stepping into your leadership or you're just calling it something else. You are already powerful and magnificent. Step into that, own it. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach the next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.